Balancing environmental protection with industrial development is no easy task. When people's jobs and industry's profits are at risk, protecting the environment sometimes takes a back seat. In fact, both are critically important to the well-being of society. Our economic health and ecological health are at stake. In the next few minutes, we will show you how to plan for industrial growth and development while maintaining concern for the environment, especially wetlands. Industry expects to have continued access to natural resources, whether for direct use, as in forest harvesting, or to construct and maintain a manufacturing facility on a parcel of land. For industrial developers, few environmental issues have received greater attention or fostered more debate in recent years than wetlands protection.
There's no doubt in my mind that economic development can coexist with environmental protection. There must be a cooperation and an understanding between all parties involved, that being the agencies that are in charge of determining the protection requirements and those who are involved in any type of economic development, that they are running down the same railroad track. And that everyone is playing by the same rules and knows the rules of the game before they start playing.
What are wetlands and what is happening to this important natural resource? Wetlands are legally defined by both state and federal agencies by using three characteristics: wetland plants, hydric soils, and hydrology. Trained wetland scientists can identify these three characteristics in the field. Wetland plants have been assigned to several categories depending on how often they are found in wet habitats. For example, some species are called obligates. That is, they are almost always found in standing water or saturated soils. Some species might be classified as facultative because they can adapt to either wet or dry conditions. Other plants are typically found in uplands. Soils that are saturated for several weeks or more, year after year, develop recognizable characteristics that are used in part to define wetlands. A mixture of brown and gray mottles near the surface usually means the water table fluctuates during the year. Soils that are dark gray are usually very wet or hydric. The presence of water at or near the surface or other hydrologic indicators, such as flooding debris or water-stained leaves, clearly indicates that wetlands are present. Saturated or inundated areas promote the development of hydric soils and hence the growth of wetland plants. In the past, wetlands were considered undesirable except for providing habitat for waterfowl. Wetlands were drained to provide additional lands for agriculture and development. They became dumping grounds for wastewater and other refuse. As wetlands continued to disappear, people began to realize that numerous free ecological services as well as economic benefits were being lost too. Wetlands temporarily store floodwaters, releasing them slowly back into stream channels after storms, thus helping to protect downstream communities from damaging flood peaks. Pollutants such as excess sediments from construction activities, nutrients from farm runoff, and stormwater from cities and towns can be filtered out by wetlands in some cases. Herbicides and insecticides can be broken down by wetland plants and bacteria, thus removing them from the environment. Wetland plants help to stabilize the banks of streams and the shores of lakes and ponds. Wetlands can provide habitat for a variety of wildlife and fish, including both game species, such as ducks and muskrats, and non-game species, such as songbirds and salamanders. It is widely known that over half of the nation's wetlands have been lost since colonial times. These losses, however, have not occurred evenly across the country. Some states, such as Ohio and California, have lost about 90% of their original wetlands. In Pennsylvania, estimates compiled by the National Wetlands Inventory of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service show that 56% of the Commonwealth's wetlands have been lost. In recent decades, over 1,000 acres of the state's 500,000 acres of remaining wetlands have been lost per year. Given the value of wetland resources and their continued loss, government agencies expect industry to comply with wetland laws and regulations.
Government protects wetlands for the benefits of all the citizens of the Commonwealth here in Pennsylvania. Wetlands are protected naturally for their environmental benefits they provide to the population in general. However, wetlands are also instrumental in providing a lot of public benefits, such as floodwater retention, stormwater retention, and they offer a lot of natural amenities to the general welfare of the population. And people have a greater appreciation for wetlands now that we're realizing that they are a unique and limited resource. And the Commonwealth is very, very adamant about protecting these areas and not allowing them to be lost as they have been historically. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, through its permitting process, closely assesses the environmental impacts of a project and also looks at the public benefits a project would be offering. And through the balancing process, tries to make a determination of whether those environmental impacts are significant or not. Additionally, local governments, municipalities, as well as other organizations have the ability to comment on permit applications submitted to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We look at those comments very carefully and include them in our permit decision.
Wetlands can be found in many different places in the landscape. For example, on the tops of ridges, at the base of slopes, and on the floodplains of streams and rivers. Thus, they are frequently found on or adjacent to lands selected for development. Conflicts arise as communities try to balance their need for economic development, which brings jobs, and a healthy environment that provides benefits to the general public. Can economic growth be compatible with wetlands protection? Given that both the local economy and the local environment need to be healthy, how do we find common ground between the two? As you will see in the next few minutes, the problems and accompanying decisions involving wetlands are difficult ones, but there are realistic solutions. Remember, because of their diverse values, wetlands are protected for the benefit of society, so the first step is to accept that fact. You should use that knowledge as guidance for selecting properties and projects for development. If wetlands are present on the majority of a parcel of land, it is a poor choice for most development activities because of the potential damage to the environment, engineering and construction hurdles, and regulatory constraints. As part of pre-construction planning, project engineers and environmental consultants should consider how existing landscape features on a property will either be a benefit or a detriment to completion of the project, and plan accordingly. Properties being considered for purchase and subsequent development should be checked for the presence and extent of wetlands. Examine topographic maps and National Wetlands Inventory maps to locate obvious wetlands on the property. Soil surveys, which are available from most county offices of the Soil Conservation Service, show the general location of hydric soils which may be unsuitable for development. If some wetlands are found to occur on a property, try to avoid affecting them by modifying designs before final plans are drawn. Identifying wetlands early on in the land development process is the first crucial step. In some instances, it is nearly impossible to avoid all impacts on wetlands. If impacts are unavoidable, it is the responsibility of the developer or his or her agent to examine the alternatives and minimize impacts. Should it be necessary to apply for a permit to encroach upon wetlands, then regulatory personnel will review the project with the public's interest in mind.
The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, under Section 404 of the Clean Water Act, regulates the discharge of dredged or fill material into wetlands. Also, the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Resources, Bureau of Dams and Waterway Management, governs activities in wetlands under Chapter 105 of the Dam Safety and Encroachments Act. These are two separate agencies issuing two separate permits. For certain activities that have minimal impact, both the state and federal agencies have a group of permits which allow the activity to occur with little delay or paperwork. For the state, these are called general permits or GPs. For the Army Corps of Engineers, these are called nationwide permits. If a project does not qualify for a GP or nationwide permit, then the resulting individual permit process can be quite lengthy due to the public notice period and also for detailed on-site investigations needed to assess impacts to the aquatic resources. During this individual permit process, public notices are issued to coordinate with the public and also with other resource agencies. For example, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Pennsylvania Fish Commission, and the Pennsylvania Game Commission. The project is then evaluated, weighing and balancing the benefits of the project versus foreseeable detriments. This is called the Public Interest Review.
Keep in mind that applying for a permit takes time and may be expensive. After assessing the environmental impacts and economic benefits of a project, the agencies may issue a permit that allows the project to proceed. To ensure that any wetlands affected by a project are replaced, a mitigation agreement may be negotiated. It is difficult to duplicate nature, and this is particularly true for healthy wetland systems. The following project exemplifies the costs incurred by industry if wetland impacts occur during the development process. In this industrial development park in central Pennsylvania, 30 acres of wetlands were created and enhanced to meet enforcement requirements and permitting conditions. Once mitigation for impacted wetlands is approved as an option for a project, a suitable site for replacement wetlands must be found. The search for the site should be coordinated with agencies, local government, and other developers who may be undertaking similar mitigation activities. The chosen site must be large enough to encompass the required wetland replacement area and the associated functions being replaced. Of prime importance is the availability of reliable sources of water to sustain the wetland permanently. Collecting surface runoff or intercepting shallow groundwater are commonly used techniques. Restoring degraded sites that supported wetlands in the past has a greater chance of success than creation of new wetlands because the source of water may still be present. The mitigation site should be as close as possible to the location of impacted wetlands. This is known as on-site mitigation, and it is preferable to selecting a location off-site. Besides the ecological consequences of relocating wetlands away from their original location, off-site locations may need to be purchased. Use of this selected site must be assured through purchase or easement before work begins. Following site selection, a set of plans must be developed to describe the construction sequence. Typically, earth moving is necessary to excavate and shape the wetland basin. After a rough grade is established, topsoil, salvaged hydric soils from recently destroyed wetlands, or some other soil amendment is spread over the site at a specified depth. Depending on the season, planting of the wetland, if necessary, can occur immediately after the hydrology is established at the newly excavated site. It is important and often required to monitor the wetland's progress to determine if a mitigation project is successful. By focusing the monitoring effort on the 3 parameters that define wetlands, the amount of wetland area created can be measured. In other circumstances, the functional capability of the newly formed wetland must be determined. For example, wildlife can be inventoried to see if the mix of vegetation is providing suitable habitat. In the sample project just reviewed, the costs associated with impacts on wetlands were quite high, about $500,000. Delineation and alternative analyses were complicated. Buying land to provide for 15 acres of wetland creation was necessary, and a total of 30 acres of wetland creation and enhancement were required. The costs of dealing with wetlands for most projects will be substantially less. Costs are portrayed here for a 10-acre site that contains several acres of wetlands for general guidance only. Costs will vary tremendously from site to site and from project to project. Identifying that wetlands occur on a property is relatively inexpensive. The costs of delineating wetlands depends both on the irregularity of boundaries to be marked and the level of investigation required. Permitting costs vary with the amount and severity of impacts proposed for the wetlands in question, and to some extent on the type of project proposed. Once design, land acquisition, and construction costs are added together, mitigation can become very expensive. Monitoring the performance of a mitigated wetland is a relatively inexpensive but necessary part of the process. In conclusion, if economic development is to proceed without delays, then careful attention must be directed towards how wetland protection is integrated into the planning, construction, and operation of industrial facilities. Early identification of wetlands before acquiring land for development is a crucial first step. Once the property is selected, avoid locating facilities in wetlands. This will reduce permitting costs and save valuable time. Keep in mind that just because wetlands are found on a parcel of land does not mean that development cannot proceed. Careful project planning by the developer with assistance from environmental and engineering professionals can result in a healthy economic venture and still protect the important services and amenities that wetlands provide to employees and local residents. If properly integrated with project plans, the presence of wetlands can enhance the appearance and operation of industrial facilities. A good rule of thumb is that the costs of environmental permitting, including wetlands, will be at least 3% of the overall cost of a project. These costs are real, so they should become part of the financial planning for any project. Planning with foresight can minimize the environmental costs of a project, just as procrastination can increase those costs dramatically. Remember, avoiding wetland encroachment means avoiding the cost of mitigation, an expensive process. If creation or restoration of wetlands is required, work cooperatively and form partnerships with agencies, local governments, sister industries, and conservation organizations to identify the best economic and ecological solutions for your company and your community. For more information about wetlands, contact the following agencies and organizations.